Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes, I am joined today by Andreas Kling, the creator, the founder, the mastermind, the head honcho, the big cheese and kahuna of Serenity OS and the Ladybird web browser. Say hello to the universe, my friend.
Hello, universe.
Nailed it. All right. We're gonna jump past all the high level stuff. We're gonna assume that our audience is nerdy enough to know what Serenity OS is, the Ladybird web browser is, and all that good stuff. And we're gonna jump past all the high level things that you have to repeat all the time. Let's get right
Sure.
into the Serenity side of things first, because I got a whole bunch of questions from our community that they want to ask you about Serenity, because we spent a whole week using Serenity just a couple of months ago, and people generally really enjoyed the experience, right? I mean, they had a really good time with it, but I think a lot of people came away wanting to run Serenity full time. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a polished enough system now that they feel like with just a few things they could install it on bare metal, and they could use it as a replacement for at least some of their systems. So with that in mind, I know Serenity started really as, a hobbyist system, right? Do you
hmm
see it getting to a point in the near future where someone could actually use it as a daily driver for at least personal systems on bare metal hardware? Do you see that as a near or medium term future possibility?
I think it's definitely possible that that will happen, but it depends entirely on just the right people with the right amount of energy picking it up and running with it, making that their own personal goal. Because all of our projects within Serenity OS and Ladybird and everything else that we do, they all run just on that pure nerd energy where somebody just really wants to see if they can get something working, right?
Yeah.
So that propelled me early on when I was just like standing up the entire system. And that's sort of something that I've tried to almost pass the torch a little bit of
Fair.
many
That's
parts of the
fair.
system,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to bare metal. That's something that very early on I kind of said, okay, this isn't actually that interesting to me to work on bare metal support. So a bunch of other people were clearly way more interested than I was, and they kind of run that show now, which I'm very happy about because really I want the the people who are the most interested. I want them to be working on it, right? And when it comes to bare metal support or like running it as a daily driver, it's just a matter of realizing that yes, this could be your future if
Yeah.
you make it.
Yeah. I-
But you have to make it.
Is that something like when you go to bed at night and you close your eyes, is that something that you dream of? I mean, you've created, along with, all the community that's formed around you in this system, you've created something that's very cool. The, the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s aesthetic of it all, the design of the system, it's kind of grown into a very unique, fun to use, and for a hobbyist system as young as it is, a very robust and polished system. Do you dream of being able to flip on your computer and it's just Serenity instead of whatever you're running right now?
Sure. I mean, that is definitely something I want to eventually reach as a goal. Um, I think that would be awesome. It's always been my own personal goal with the project to just get it to the point where I can do all my daily tasks, and then I will consider it complete. Thankfully, we have hundreds of other people with other criteria, so it doesn't actually stop just because you can, do whatever I consider my daily tasks. Um, but I guess I kind of over time, I kind of became very comfortable with the idea that this is going to take a very long time, especially when we added on the browser, because I figured if we're going to build a whole operating system, we're going to have to build a browser because,
You have to
operating
do it.
systems have browsers.
Yeah.
You have to do it. And building a browser takes a very long time. So if I maintained sort of my earlier attitude of this is going to be fast and breezy and fun, and we'll be done pretty soon, and it will be my daily driver. That attitude doesn't really work when you're trying to build a browser because it just takes so long. There's so much work to do. So I've kind of calmed down a little bit on the speed aspect, I guess.
You settled yourself
Um,
down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I kind of get that.
yeah, yeah. I had to, scaling up the ambition forced me to scale down my expectation of speed. um, it's a weird trade-off, but I think it's realistic. So,
Okay, I mean that's fair and that's reasonable. I guess when I look at the system and I start playing around with it and using it, it really checks a lot of the check boxes for what I want in a computer system. You know what I mean? It's as
mhm.
a I think we're probably not too far apart in age, and growing up when we did, this kind of was a sweet spot, a comfort zone for not just UI design but system design and all of it. And Serenity is just a nice comfortable pair of fuzzy slippers. And if I could run it as my daily system, how cool would that be? And so I look at it, and really there's not too many things that prevent that. And one of the things beyond hardware and driver support, which is obviously a giant task, but one of the
Mhm.
things is the way software is installed. And I wanted to ask you about this because this is, to me, this is fascinating. Because in Serenity OS right now, and I know I don't need to tell you this, but you install software essentially by essentially just kind of doing a rebuild of the whole system. You know what I mean? And that's a great approach for the active developers of a system, which really is the target audience for Serenity at the moment. Do you see that changing anytime, really any time, to becoming more of a standard package installer or drag and drop app installer scenario where people could, just distribute binaries of software? Do you see it going in that direction, or are you guys kind of sticking with the whole, you know, you know, run a make file to rebuild the whole system and then any software packages that go with it?
So in the last couple of weeks, some folks have been working on exactly that, a package manager. So we
Really?
do now have, yeah.
Awesome.
And it's still early days, but something is coming up because it is a little bit tedious to rebuild the whole system just because you want to install a Quake or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say that the true way to install software on Serenity OS is to write it, of course. Um, that is sort of the real spirit of the system is
But you know what I mean. Like I
I
mean,
know.
I love it. Like, and I've got, so one of the fans of the show that's in my community, literally does a rebuild of Serenity every day and has all of the different ports available so we can see all the different applications everyone's working on and he can check it out because he just thinks it's just so incredibly cool. And I can't blame him for that. It's just, that's as you expand beyond the hardcore developer world, which may not even be a goal for you guys for quite some time. Obviously, not needing to run make files to install software is kind of nice.
Yeah, I think, I mean, realistically, I don't think we will ever expand outside of the hardcore nerd world. But outside of the hardcore developer world might be interesting for sure. I think ultimately you shouldn't have to be a C++ programmer just to be able to run the system or tweak it.
Right.
And that's sort of where we've been at for a long time. Um, but over time, things get a little bit more casual and more user friendly, hopefully at least. And we'll get to a place where you can do stuff like, automatic install and boot from a live USB stick or install binary packages,
Ooh.
like all these kind of niceties, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think we will accumulate all of those. And we have started with Package Manager in particular recently. So that is a nice development, maybe a sign of things to come.
That's kind of exciting. I mean, that's a pretty exciting little moment. So considering that, I mean, if people are running Serenity right now, they're doing it in a virtual machine. When you
Mhm.
do your Ladybird development, when you're working on your web browser, what system are you doing that development in? Do you do more of that development in Serenity nowadays, or do you use a host OS? And if so, what host OS does the mastermind behind Serenity run as his daily driver?
Well, right now I'm splitting my time between latest Ubuntu and a copy of Slackware from 2001. Uh,
What?
because um,
Slackware from 2001? I don't even
yeah,
think Patrick Volkerding himself runs Slackware from 2001, my friend. What?
he might
Why?
not.
Why on earth? Why on earth are you running a 22-year-old version of Slackware?
Well, I've just been doing a bunch of browser archaeology recently,
Oh, I
digging out
see.
super, super old versions of browsers. And I just, I tried getting them to build on modern day Linux, and just everything has moved around. And like the even like C library functions that you thought were standard actually looked a bit different 22 years ago.
It
It's
did.
just a super
Yeah.
tedious task to port old code to modern Linux, and it was easier to just install old Slackware. So now I have that as well, and I've just been spending a bunch of time in there doing code archaeology on stuff like Mozilla, Mosaic, super old Conqueror browser, things like that.
Now you worked on
Um,
Conqueror for a while, isn't that? Didn't you? Or
yeah,
was it?
I did
Yeah.
back in '05. I did a couple of things. Um, I think the I was a web developer at the time, and also a very fanatical KDE user. Um, Possibly
I think that
the only
describes
person in
most
my
KDE
town.
users, though. I think.
Yeah, I might have been the only employed web developer using KDE, at least where I lived. Um, and it was always a bit of a struggle explaining to my employer why it was important that websites should look right in Conqueror, because they were like, "What is KDE? What are you talking
Yeah.
about?"
Yeah. No,
Uh,
no, no. The five KDE users, they really need it.
that's
I,
right.
I used to. I have a buddy of mine named Aaron Saigo. He used to be the head of KDE for many years, and I used to joke with him because
Right. Yeah, I met him in 2006, I
oh,
think.
Aaron's a great guy. He used to just he was kind of the chief cheerleader of KDE for quite a long time, and boy, I tell you, as many memes and jokes as Arch users get for having to tell people about how they run Arch. Back in the day, KDE users were 1,000 times more into that. Man, you could not, if you were in a conversation about your computer with a KDE user, they told you they ran KDE. it was it was just a kind of a common thing. And I feel like we've lost that over the years. I miss KDE users telling me about their KDE installs. Those are good times.
True, yeah. What did happen to that? Because I
I
used to
don't
do that too,
know.
but I just stopped at some point.
It did. I don't know if the version changes. You know, because KDE used to be there used to be like a million radio buttons for every single setting in the world under KDE, and I think that whole mentality has kind of changed a bit. And so I don't know. I think maybe a lot of those. A lot of those folks kind of jumped ship and went elsewhere as KDE matured into Plasma or whatever.
You know,
Anyway,
yeah.
go ahead, go
No,
ahead,
I
go
think
ahead.
that's what happened to me too. I think that's what happened to me with KDE is that at some point I just realized that there are too many buttons here and I got work to do. Um,
But it's
and
exciting at first,
yeah,
right? You have all these settings.
yeah. It's a bit like when you're a kid and you just have infinite time to play games and fool around, and then you grow up and you realize that you don't have time for all these buttons. And I think that's what happened to me. And this thing that I used to love about KDE just became kind of an eyesore at some point. But of course, like KDE is very different today.
It is.
But back in the KDE 3 days, it was a feature cornucopia.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they never met a feature they didn't like. They just
Right,
incorporated all of them.
and they put all of them like right in the toolbars
I
and
know.
top level menus and stuff.
Their control panels were the messiest things I think I've ever seen in my life, but like in an endearing, lovable way. Like it was that's what made it special was the 10,000 little radio buttons for every single feature. I
True.
kind of miss that. It's KDE Plasma current desktop. I know it's unique and has some very cool features, but it's a little bit too much like the GNOME shell and kind of everything everyone else is doing. It used to be so different and unique, and I don't know. I miss that. I miss that uniqueness about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So okay, all right. Let's pivot over to the web browsing side of things because
Sure.
there's a lot of action going on here. Now Ladybird, I've got to say first off, I am really impressed with how much progress that browser has made. You guys have done phenomenal work over the last several months. I've watched as more and more websites, and you post about this regularly, but it's becoming increasingly usable. More websites are just looking correct, and considering that you guys are writing this all from scratch, that's that's kind of mind blowing. And now that you guys have some funding, right? You guys have had
Hmm.
some generous benefactors come in, and you now have how many people are working on it full time at this point?
So there's myself and two full-time software engineers working on it right now.
Hot diggity! I mean,
Yeah,
this is kind of an exciting moment. I mean, I don't have to tell you. You worked you worked on Conqueror, you worked on Safari at Apple. Is that right?
that's right. Yeah, and I also worked on mobile browsers at Nokia for a while.
So I mean, you've been around the web browser building space for a heck of a long time. You're a veteran in that
Hmm.
space. But it feels like we are in dire need of a shakeup. Like we could really use a fresh engine that's actually capable and isn't just run by one of two specific groups. And this is really exciting. It's something new without all the crust and cruft and baggage. Just a brand new engine. How does it cause you to wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat and panic, thinking that you're undertaking a brand new web browser engine with employees to attempt to become? Because that's got to be the goal, right? To attempt to become a viable web browser or web browsing engine. Does that freak you out?
Not really, because that's just what I've been doing every day for years anyway.
That's
Um,
fair.
just it's more like I feel at peace now that I'm finally just doing this again. It was a it was a confusing time for a while when I didn't have a browser to work on.
Okay, all
Um,
right. So it's good to have a browser, and now it's a browser that you control. I mean, that's kind of nice. So you can kind of help guide and set the priorities of it, which I mean that's got to be a first for you. I mean, in terms of browser development.
yeah, for sure. But even so, um, it is very much an open source project where people just kind of work on what they're interested in. Even my full-time employees now, I'm not micromanaging them in any way, but rather just asking them to work on things that move the browser forward in a meaningful way, and uh, keep an open dialogue with me about like what things do we consider moving it forward, because we're in this interesting position right now where there's just so much work to do that it's kind of hard to do something that's a waste of time. Like there are just so many things that we have to do.
So
And
if you throw a dart, it's going to hit something that gives you points. I kind of
yeah,
get
yeah,
that.
exactly. Exactly. So, but of course, there are high value items and lower value items. So it's important to be honest about what's important for the sort of general browsing use case, and also just like what's a fun, nerdy project.
Yeah.
But so far, I think we're managing to stay on the very productive side of that equation.
Well,
So that is working well.
so
But at the
yeah, go
same
ahead.
time, I know that eventually we will run out of these obviously, like super obviously useful things, and we will have exhausted the low-hanging fruits, and now we have to actually put more effort into um, like figuring out tasks that are going to move us forward. But right now we're in this luxurious low-hanging fruit land where, yeah, as you say, you can throw a dart and you'll hit a valuable thing.
Yeah, 'cause there's so many. I mean, web standards, you have to kind of put, quotation marks around standards because there's just so many and so many browser engines and so many implementations and so many versions of JavaScript and every website seems to do things differently and so you kind of guys are going along and what I see you doing a lot of times is you'll load up a website like for a hotel that you'll be staying at and you're like, well, this website doesn't look
Sure.
right. So then you'll be like, okay, and I've updated Ladybird and I fixed it. Now this website looks right. And I kind of love that approach. It's almost like instead of simply adhering to the spec of whatever the W3C just puts out and telling web designers to fix their websites, it seems to me like you guys are kind of going around and being like, okay, let's use the modern web and make Ladybird work with it. Is that kind of more your general approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm taking kind of the video game emulation approach to browser development, where like
Yes.
you're building an emulator, and then at some point it's good enough that you can load a game, and of course it doesn't work, but you can kind of figure out why it doesn't work, and then um, fix it, and then now that game works, or like the loading screen of that game shows up, and you've made progress, and then you keep doing that with different games. Um, and it's a very, very satisfying way of working because you're always making sort of visual, tangible progress on real targets in the real world. It's so much more gratifying than doing the same thing with like a spec, just going through 100 spec items, or like, now I'm implementing this algorithm from the spec and I don't even know who uses it, but it has to be there, they say.
That
And
is, you
yeah,
actually get to see tangible results. You make
right.
you make the div work. You make the image centered. Like you actually can reload and see. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, yeah, I think programmers go a little nutty if they don't see progress or they don't see any tangible improvement from their work. So um, it's important to get that get into that kind of feedback loop, I think. And of course, that's what I'm encouraging everybody who works on Ladybird to do. But ultimately, I can't stop someone from sitting and banging out, a spec from
Yeah,
start to finish. If you want to,
if
some
they
people have done that.
if they really
I
want.
don't think they had a great time. Yeah.
Because there's so many specs at this point. Like it
Yeah.
would be far more gratifying to say I'm gonna make, this particular website. Which, by the way, the my lunduke.locals.com where I publish all my stuff is slowly looking better and better in Ladybird. I haven't loaded it up in a couple of weeks, but I'm sure you guys haven't worked on that specifically, but it's getting better and better and better. It still has a ways to go before I could, log in and compose drafts and everything like that and use it end to end. But for people just reading the stuff, it's mostly there, which honestly is pretty cool because it's not necessarily the most simple website in the world. That's kind of neat.
Yeah. No, we actually did work on your website specifically, at least at one point,
Yeah.
because um, I heard you talking about it, and then you said something about being sneaky and tricking us into working on it, and I felt like, all right,
It worked.
it did work.
Oh, fantastic. Oh.
Because at that point, it was like, what am I going to do? Not fix it?
Well, it does look better now. so
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
thank you. um,
Sure.
quick. I have to do a quick deviation. So this show is being made free for everyone. All the work I do is not ad supported; it's all listener supported. And Greggy over in our community made sure he kind of pitched in some extra bucks to make this episode free, and he wanted me to read the following message for the world, and I'm going to try and do this in one take. 17346732146 Charlie 32789777643 Tango 732 Victor 731178873247678976436. So there you go. Greggy has has sent that message to the world. So thank you, Greggy, for that. But bonus
I
points.
wonder what you just shared.
Do you recognize that at all, Andreas? I gotta ask.
No,
No, it's okay.
not really.
That's okay. There's a very small handful of people that will be sitting at home listening to this right now, going, "I know what that is. What is that? What did he just say?" And then they'll look that up online, type in some of the numbers, and figure it out. It'll be great. I'll leave that to an exercise for the listener.
Fair enough.
All right. So let's move on a little bit here. Well, I've been watching you do kind of this web archaeology thing, and where you've been trying out old web browsers. You even went back in, and was it on Mosaic where you added the blink tag back in? Was that the browser you did that in? That
Yeah,
is
right.
the best thing I've ever seen happen. So when Blink got deprecated, I ranted about that for quite some time in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, but to see you go back in, load up the code for Mosaic, and add in support for the Blink HTML tag just because you could, that's beautiful, man. That's just beautiful. Tell me about that, because that's the coolest thing to me.
Well, I just have been doing a bunch of explorations of old browsers to try to figure out how they worked. I guess it's been a bit of a pilgrimage or something like that, where I'm paying respect to the history of our field of browser development and visiting all the old sites. And while I was looking at the code, I just felt like I'm going to get a way better understanding of this code if I try to edit it, if I try to do something with it. So I figured I should add some features. And what better feature than something that came sort of shortly after Mosaic died down. So like one of the early Netscape features that they came up with. And yeah, Blink seemed like an obvious choice because it was sort of, I don't know, such an iconic dumb HTML feature from that time.
Man, every GeoCities site needs a Blink, man. I miss it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It was actually the hardest part of it, I think, was figuring out what the flashing frequency should actually be. Like, how fast should it blink?
Love it.
Because yeah, it was a little bit confusing at first, but I think I got it right. And it was just, yeah, it was interesting to see how you would do that, because browsers back then, they were implemented very, very differently from the way we do them today. They didn't sort of build up this nice data structure that contains the HTML document so that you can sort of look at it in memory and manipulate it and do things to it. Instead, it sort of just does this really primitive flow layout where you just start in the top left corner and then you just put things into the window as long as they fit, and then you break lines and such. And I'm much more used to the modern browsers where you have these like intricate in-memory data structures where everything is available. And I don't know, it reminded me of this old school programming that we used to do back in the day, in the 90s when memory was scarce, and you would kind of take a lot of shortcuts that you don't really do anymore, because there's just so much memory nowadays and processors are so much faster. that you kind of make things more elegant. And it was fun to just get back into that mindset and cut corners a little bit.
I kind of love that.
So yeah,
I love that.
and
Go ahead.
yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
the I was gonna say the way I implemented the blink ultimately was by just repainting the entire window um, twice per second, and then just flipping a global variable that says if blinking text should be visible or not visible, and then just repainting the whole window on a repeating timer, and it was just like stupid, ugly, and it worked,
But it worked.
and yeah, and it felt
Yes.
just right.
I think that was right for the time. That feels genuine to me. So, okay. All right.
Yeah, and it got like kind of janky, and it would flicker, and even that
But
felt right.
the early browsers like that, I love them. God bless them. But they were a little janky. Like
Yeah,
there was quite a few old browser projects around Mosaic. And not even including all the old Gopher projects and everything else. But they tended to have some pretty peculiar bugs that clearly resulted from things like they tried to shoehorn in blink support, so they repainted the whole window, and that screwed up a few other things. Like that was a pretty
right.
common thing back then, and I kind of do miss it. I miss the rawness of it. You know what I mean? Like you could almost feel like you were there with the programmer as they were like, this will work. It's good enough. And I love that.
Yeah, I definitely found a lot of that vibe. Like when moving on to, I also looked a lot at early Netscape versions and tried to run JavaScript on them. And it was really interesting to me just how crashy it was. Uh, just like trying to do anything in JavaScript, because I had Netscape 2 as a kid, and I would make websites, but I didn't understand JavaScript. I knew that JavaScript existed, so I would go online and search on like Alta Vista or Yahoo or whatever for JavaScript snippets that I could put into my website. So I would have a rotating clock or something. And um, going back into that environment as an adult who can program JavaScript, it was really interesting to me how easy it was to make it crash. Like if I did anything like colored outside the lines, just a squiggle, it
Oh
would just
yeah.
crash.
Oh yeah. It was brutal back then. It was
It
brutal.
really was.
Yeah. It was funny. I had Brendan Ike, the guy who created JavaScript, on my show a long time ago, and the first question out of the gate, I get him on the show, introduce him to the world, and then I ask him, "So, Brendan, what's it feel like to have created the thing that made the world a worse place?" Like I was, I had to give him a hard time about that, but I got to tell you the guy who created JavaScript has a really good sense of humor about JavaScript, and he's a real nerd. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, Brendan is very nerdy.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
But yeah, he's great. I tagged him when I was poking around with the early JavaScript engine from the first open source version of Mozilla, and he seemed genuinely delighted that somebody was poking around his old code. So um,
For
I was happy
sure.
to see that.
It's a sad thing when code goes to die, when it just gets lost in the dustbin of history and forgotten. It's a sad thing. There's so much really genuinely interesting work in history that's gone into in the software world in general, and not just browsers, but everything that just gets discarded so quickly. And it's not like I want to sit here and run Netscape 1.0. I don't want to actually do that, but at the same time, the fact that nobody runs it kind of bums me out a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's weird because people, there is definitely a subculture of retro computing enthusiasts or whatever who love running old operating systems, and they play old games
you're
and
you're talking to a lot
um,
of them right now.
right. Hello. I'm one of them for sure. But this community, it sort of it feels to me like it kind of specializes in more mainstream software, and you don't see that much exploration of like totally random software from olden times. And I would love to see more of that as well.
I
Not
totally
just,
agree.
the Photoshops and the Windows 95s and stuff like
But
that. But
there's just so many weird old browsers out there. Like I saw you like diving through and figuring out which of the earliest browsers was the first to implement tabs and kind of going through all these different things. And I'm like, it's beautiful to see people not just talking about that, but going back and poking at it and finding it and posting screenshots about it. And it it doesn't just scratch that nostalgic itch, but it helps our collective nerdy memory. I think so many people nowadays forget how things really were. Not just in the long ago like the 60s and 70s, but even in the 1990s. So many people just don't remember or weren't around to experience what computing was really like in the 90s. And so, you posting a lot of this stuff from the early to mid 90s around web browsing back then is just beautiful. I love that you're doing it. I know it's time
yeah,
consuming,
sure.
but every time you post it, it makes me smile.
Yeah, no, it's time happily spent because it's so interesting to me to just learn more about these things. And um, just to add on to something you were saying there about like people, the experience of using old software is very different from just looking at pictures of it. And I do
Yes.
think I agree that more people should actually take the time to tinker with these things if they're interested. And one thing in particular, I think everybody should experience, especially younger folks, is the feeling of like clicking on something in the start menu in old Windows and the app showing up before you let go of, but like before the mouse
Yes.
click is complete.
Oh my
Um,
heavens. Oh, it's a
when
beautiful
you double
thing.
click on Notepad or something and it just
It's
pops up
there.
faster than you can.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
just
like
there.
it knew you wanted it, and so it was just ready for you. I just
Yeah,
I
like, once you see that and realize that it's possible, I think it's an important thing to see.
I was
Um,
I was complaining about keyboard and mouse latency and the delays and responsiveness of toolbar buttons and whatnot, and I was in person at an event one time, and a couple of young whippersnappers were kind of disagreeing with me on that. They're like, no, 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 the USB latency is not a problem, and no, my system's fast, man. I got a Core i7 here, and when I click on stuff, it does stuff. I'm like, no, 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 you don't understand. And so we had there one guy had there an old, probably I want to say it was a 286 or a 386 with the keyboard and mouse plugged in via PS2, and I'm like, come look at this for a second. And we clicked and we typed, and you could almost see them after a while start to get it. They're like, yeah, something feels different. Like the immediacy, it feels faster. I mean, even though this machine is ancient and a million times slower in every possible way than that newer machine, whether it's the bus speeds in use or the less complexity of the software, things were just immediate, and that feeling that you get from it is almost delightful when you return to it now after using modern computers for so many years.
Indeed, indeed. I think you still get a glimmer of that when you're using a video game console these days
Yeah,
because, in a single task environment, it's just that much easier to be fast and responsive. But on a desktop computer, you very rarely have that level of responsiveness in anything anymore.
it's so true.
Which, yeah, it's a bit sad.
You,
Um,
on those notes, and this is just a little bit of a kudos. There's also, and you may agree or disagree with this, but I have a very big emotional connection to my computers and the software I use. And for better or worse, I kind of identify with them. Like, when I have those old computers that don't just bring me nostalgia for using them, I remember customizing them and really diving into them and having them almost be an extension of me somehow. My old AT and working on an old Commodore 64 over here, they feel, there is an emotion to it, a soul into those old machines. And not just because I use them, but I think because of the people that built them. And you can feel, smell, and sense the soul of them. And when you use most modern operating systems nowadays, there isn't much of a soul anymore. You sit down with the latest version of Windows or Mac OS, and yes, they're impressive pieces of software. They are. I admit they're big and giant and bloated, but they do have some cool things and some cool pieces of technology behind them, but they lack a certain soul. And I gotta say, after spending a week in Serenity, there's something there. There's a spark of a soul in that. And whether it's that you can feel after using it for a period of time, the feelings that the developers put into it. Maybe it's that the developers are a little bit closer to it, a little bit fewer total developers than, say, worked on, Windows or what have you, but you can feel a soul to it. And I want to commend you guys for that, you and your whole team, because I think that's something that's been missing in software in general, and it's nice to see that come back, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I felt like I needed to say that.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. The whole Serenity OS community is doing such a good job with that, I think. And it's one of the best things in my life is like putting some weird software out there and just having a huge community pick it up and say, this is so cool. I'm going to spend my time on it. Um, and I'm so grateful that that has happened. And I don't even know. Um, I don't know if I will ever do anything as cool as that. So that's been great, and I'm really proud of, um, proud of what we do. I'm proud of the community that works on it, and I think you're right that people are um, closer to it, and it's a small team that just genuinely cares about what they're doing. Like nobody is being told what to do. Everybody's just implementing random things that they genuinely care about, and then this is what you get. And it kind of makes you wonder, like when you look back on the software from the 80s and 90s, like what was it that was different back then that made it so that it had this soul feeling that you described? Because it seems to me that it's kind of easy to make soulful software if you're doing it on a volunteer basis as a hobby and you just love programming, so you do that. But like, what were those companies doing? Like, how did they get people so amped up about it? Um, that they created this soulful software even at their jobs. I don't know how that worked. Like,
They wanted to be there. They wanted to do that. That was the thing that they wanted to do. I when you worked on software in the 90s even, it was mostly because you wanted to work on that software or software from that company. You wanted to do that. Nowadays, people they just go to work on whatever random JavaScript framework stack that their company will pay them the most to work on. And I don't blame them for that. I understand. But it's I think
yeah, I
I think
mean, the
I think
yeah,
the whole motivation and feeling around it is different.
true. And also there are like just thousands times more of developer jobs these days.
Yeah.
So I guess back then it was way more of an esoteric career, and the people who were programmers, they were actually pretty damn nerdy people, I would say. I would
They
hazard
were
a guess.
they were blazing new trails. They were creating,
Yeah.
whether they were creating the new version of Gem or Windows or Mac OS or whatever it was. They were creating that, and that was in many cases just totally new ground. That was green field. It was cool. It was really cool. Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay. I have a couple more questions I want to get to before we run out of time here.
Yeah.
First, On the web browser front, when you sit down and you're working on the rendering engine behind Ladybird, how important to you is the memory usage side of things? Because I mean that's the common complaint with Firefox and the Chrome and everything else is, oh, I loaded up a tab. I now am using 1.21 gigabytes of RAM for every single tab that comes up. Is that, as you're building Ladybird, are you finding that you're having a similar issue as you go along where RAM is slowly ballooning out of control because of the way modern web development and standards work, or are you able to keep it smaller? Like how forefront of your mind is that memory usage?
It's definitely a secondary concern at the moment because we are just lacking basic features and we're slow. And as long as we
Sure.
are missing features and it's painfully slow, I would be happy to pay a little extra memory to improve um, on those axes. But uh, I think memory usage is absolutely important. It was my primary job when I worked at Apple for years, was just Safari memory usage. So it is something that is near and dear to my heart, and I will eventually be happy to work on that aggressively in Ladybird as well. But I think it's just an area where, or it's just like a thing that we're compromising on a little bit at the moment, just to bring up all of the basic features and performance elsewhere.
I guess you got to
But
compromise somewhere.
yeah,
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 all
yeah.
right.
You just have to. Yeah, you have to choose something. It's the whole fast, good, cheap. You have to kind of pick one.
Right. And like, not it's not really a choice of our own, but we are making this for pretty cheap. So um,
Hey, but you
that
got full time
yeah,
developers now. That's pretty cool. that's
true,
that's
yeah,
pretty darn neat.
yeah, true. Although I think we are probably still the smallest browser team with full-time developers.
I should almost put together a
um,
chart of all the developers and the total cost going into it. Ladybird versus Chrome versus Firefox. Just to see what that bar chart would look like.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
obviously, it's not apples to apples, but even so, it is. I think it is remarkable just how much we've been able to do with a small team of
No, you
just
know
highly
what?
motivated
You are
volunteers.
wrong, Andreas. It is apples to apples. You are doing a massive amount of work on a shoestring budget with a fairly small team. I mean, you've got some clearly very talented people and very committed people, putting in their time to make Ladybird great. And you see that the progress that you see is significant. Whereas when you look at, let's say, what's happening with Firefox, the sheer number of people paid to work on it is mammoth. And while yes, it's a more mature, browser engine because it's been around a long time, the amount of progress you see is infinitesimally smaller. And I would posit that you guys are simply doing a better job by being more nerdy and in there actually getting the work done. Whereas at these bigger companies, these big mega firms like Mozilla and Google, they're just kind of wasting that money on not working on their core. I mean, could you imagine if they put the same resources into committed engineers and developers, just the best coders, like what you clearly have going, into theirs? Well, we'd have a very different landscape right now. And so I would posit that it is apples to apples, and you simply are running circles around them on a person by person basis.
Well, I definitely don't want to badmouth any of the engineers working on Mozilla because I think there are, really brilliant people there. I know a lot of people who work on it, but I will say that the way they spend their money is a little bit puzzling to me.
Yeah, it's a little
Um,
strange. It's a little strange. It's a little strange.
yeah.
Um,
Let's leave it at that.
we'll leave that at that. I don't want to get you in trouble. Um, I'll leave that for a show I do solo where people can just yell at me personally. One other thing I wanted to talk about, because I think this is kind of interesting to me, is when you look around at operating systems, at web browsers and whatnot, most projects do not have a face associated with them, right? Most projects, most companies, whether by design or just because of how they got built up, are somewhat faceless, right? Like when you think of modern GNOME or modern KDE, who comes to mind? Well, in the old days, I could maybe think of someone, but anymore, not so much. When you think of, modern Windows, it's like, okay, during certain periods of Microsoft's history, there was like a Windows guy that really stood out. Nowadays, unless you work at Microsoft, you don't necessarily know who's even running the general division anymore, right? And the same is true in the web browser space. Like at Google and at Firefox, you're right. There are some extremely talented engineers working on it and some good people at both companies working on both projects, but there's not like a figurehead. While Mozilla does have Mitchell Baker, that kind of is the CEO, she's not out there being the figurehead for anything. In What's interesting to me about both Serenity and Ladybird is you kind of are the face of it, and it is somewhat refreshing to have that because that's something we had a lot more of in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s. We would have these companies building operating systems like do you remember the B operating system? They had
Sure.
Jean-Louis Gasset. He was this eccentric French guy from Apple, right? And he was great. And he was the face of the B operating system. He was quirky, he was opinionated, he was French, and he was out there talking about it, and he was awesome, right? And you had so many companies and browsers and things like that. Or for a period of time, Brendan Eich was kind of like the face of JavaScript and the Firefox side of things for a while, right? Now he's over at Brave and is still one of the few really public facing nerd. And it's nice to see an operating system and browser project with a public facing nerd behind it. And it's interesting. I don't know if that's something you think about much, but you really are the spokesperson for not just a growing product line, but a growing community and a growing set of software that people are genuinely interested in. How does it feel to you being kind of that public face of it? And is that something that you ever wanted? Are you comfortable with that? Because it's happened to you.
It's definitely not something I set out to um, create for myself, but
Uh-oh. Did I
I
lose you?
think the one
There
thing
he
that's
goes.
kind of related when I first started building Serenity was that I wanted to model it after the way we built software at Apple, which was everything under one roof and full accountability within the group of developers. So like whatever problem you encounter, you never have to like go outside of the community to find who's responsible for it. And um, I felt like that was an awesome way to build software, the way Apple does it, and that didn't really exist in open source as far as I could see, at least not at the scale that I would like it to be, where you have like a complete desktop operating system developed as a single team.
Yes.
So I think what my role eventually became is sort of a side effect of trying to build something in that way. Um, and it has upsides and downsides, but I think it's on the whole it's a positive experience. Um, the main thing I'm concerned about on a day-to-day basis is just keeping everybody focused on stuff that they enjoy and making sure that Serenity remains sort of a happy place for everybody. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to do what I tell them or they have to do certain things, but that it's like a place of calm and a place of serenity, if you will, where everybody can just come and relax and work on stuff that genuinely interests them. And um,
I love it.
what, yeah, what that entails, like keeping that balance, it keeps changing over time. And we, like the community has scaled up from one person in a room by himself 5 years ago to thousands of people, and there have definitely been like a bunch of steps along the way where like we had to change the way we communicate or the way that we organize certain things because the old way was just like not feasible anymore. And I think we're doing a good job with that. At least it seems to me, because everybody seems kind of happy to be tinkering, and um, I hope that we can scale up to at least double the size of a community without having to change much at this moment. Um, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well, so you're basically like a hippie commune of nerds, so to speak. Like you got a like you set up a couple of yurts and some stations and everyone hangs out and does some knitting and I like it. I mean and honestly
Hippie
it's
comment,
a
yeah, or maybe it's more like a kindergarten, and I just set up like the finger painting and sing songs to everybody.
So what you're saying is the headline from this is Serenity OS founder says developers like kindergartners. Got it. Got it. I'm writing that down right now. That will be the gotcha quote from this interview. No.
Damn it.
Oh, foiled again. All right, all right. This has actually been really nice. Once again, you've done really fantastic work. I I I love that companies and individuals have stepped up to allow you to be able to focus on this work. All too often, there's truly talented engineers that don't get that chance, and it just warms my icy little heart when I see it happen. Because then I see developers like you and the ones that you've hired and everything else get the chance to really stretch your wings and see what you can do with the ideas you've got. So I'm excited for it. And honestly, I have my fingers crossed. I would love to be able to one day, hopefully not too far off, run Serenity as a daily driver. And I know that's not necessarily your guys' number one priority, but man, would it be neat for me. Cuz I like what you guys have done so far. And it would just be super, super duper cool. Before we head off into the sunset, is there anything you want to tell anyone? Any URLs, any universal resource locators you want to lay on people, or anything you want to just inform the world about?
Not really. I just want to say thank you to everybody who works on the system and everybody who supports it or me in some way. It's absolutely beautiful thing to be able to do this. And thank you also, Brian, for having me on your show. And hopefully some of your listeners will enjoy what we talked about.
I'm, I've got a little hinkling that some of them will. All right, everybody. All my nerds and nerdettes, go forth, go install Serenity in a virtual machine again, just to tax their servers a little bit more. And with that, thank you, Andreas, for joining me. Keep up the great work, my dude. And I do declare, end podcast.